Elena, my grandmother asked, her voice calm and oddly precise. Why is there a retired couple living in the lake house I bought for you? Thanksgiving dinner continued around that question for half a second, then stopped. The clink of a fork against china sounded too loud. Someone had just refilled a water glass, and the ice shifted slowly once, then settled. I was seated near the end of the table in my father's suburban home outside Madison, Wisconsin, where the windows always fogged up in November, and the thermostat was set higher than necessary. A roasted turkey sat untouched in the center. Steam lifted, thinned, disappeared. I didn't answer right away. Not because I was choosing my words, but because the words didn't exist yet. I was holding my napkin in my left hand folded too tightly. I remember noticing the crease it left on my thumb. My grandmother, Margaret Moore, had returned from Europe 2 days earlier. She still wore her travel coat draped over the back of her chair, the collar slightly bent from being packed. She hadn't raised her voice. She didn't need to. "I'm sorry," I said finally. "I don't know what you're talking about." Across from me, my father lowered his eyes to his plate. My stepmother shifted in her seat and reached for her wine glass, then stopped. The candles between us flickered as someone passed by the kitchen doorway, and the light briefly cut across my grandmother's face. She was watching me closely, not with suspicion, but with calculation, as if adjusting for a variable she hadn't expected. "The house on Lake Mendota," she said. "The one I purchased 3 years ago. In your name." She spoke the last part slowly, not for emphasis, for clarity. I looked down at the table. There were crumbs near my plate from a roll I hadn't finished. I was aware in a distant way that my bank account held less than $20 that morning, that I'd parked 2 blocks away to avoid a ticket because I couldn't risk the fine. These facts didn't collide yet. They hovered separately, waiting. "There must be a mistake," my stepmother said quickly. "Mom, you've just gotten back. You're exhausted. Let's not do this right now." My grandmother didn't look at her. She kept her eyes on me. "Elena," she said again, "have you ever been to that house?" I shook my head. The movement felt mechanical. My chair scraped softly as I adjusted my weight, and I realized then that everyone was watching my hands, not my face. "That's impossible," she said, more to herself than to me. No one reached for their food. No one changed the subject. Outside, a car passed on the street tires, hissing on wet pavement. Inside, the air held. And in that stillness, I understood only one thing with certainty: whatever I had just stepped into had already been happening for a long time without me. The silence didn't break on its own. It had to be pushed aside the way you move a chair back when there's no room left to breathe. My grandmother was still watching me, waiting for the correction she assumed would come. I felt it then, the expectation that this was a misunderstanding that would resolve itself if I just searched my memory hard enough. "I don't own anything," I said. My voice sounded flat, even to me. "I don't even have a place to sleep." Someone inhaled sharply. I didn't look up to see who. I was focused on the edge of the table where the varnish had worn thin from years of elbows and spilled drinks. The house smelled like sage and butter. The clock above the refrigerator ticked once loud in the pause. "That's impossible," my grandmother said. I nodded once. The movement was small, almost polite. "I was asked to leave my apartment last month. The lease ended, and I couldn't renew it. I've been staying on a friend's couch since then. 2 weeks at a time. I keep my bag in my car." I hadn't planned to say that much. It came out in short lines like a list I'd memorized. I kept my hands folded in my lap. My fingers had gone numb somewhere between the first sentence and the last. I noticed a thin crack in the ceiling above the dining table, branching like a vein. I'd never seen it before. My stepmother laughed softly, not a full laugh, just a sound meant to smooth things over. "Elena exaggerates when she's stressed," she said. "She's always been dramatic about money." I didn't respond. The word dramatic slid across the table and landed where it always did. No one picked it up. My father cleared his throat and reached for the gravy boat, then stopped when he realized no one else was eating. He set it back down without pouring. My grandmother leaned back in her chair. The wood creaked under her weight. "How long?" she asked, still looking at me. "A month," I said. Then after a moment, "Almost 5 weeks." She pressed her lips together. Her hand rested on the cane beside her chair, fingers curled loosely around the handle. The cane had a small chip near the base. I wondered when it had happened and whether she remembered it. I check my account every morning, I added, because the space seemed to demand something concrete. Today it was $18 and some change. I didn't buy coffee. The words landed heavier than I expected. My stepmother's smile faded. She reached for her napkin and folded it again tighter this time. My father finally looked at me, his eyes flicking away almost immediately as if he'd touched something hot. That can't be right, my grandmother said. I sent money for maintenance, for taxes. I made sure. She stopped herself. The sentence cut off cleanly. I saw it then, the moment where her certainty shifted just enough to expose something underneath. She turned her head slowly, not toward my father or my stepmother, but past them. Her gaze moved to the other end of the table. Lily sat very still, her shoulders rigid, her wineglass untouched. The red had settled into a dark ring at the bottom. She hadn't said a word since dinner began. As my grandmother's eyes settled on her, Lily's hand tightened around the stem of the glass. I heard the faint click of her ring against the crystal. The room didn't feel smaller. It felt arranged like pieces finally placed in the correct order. I see, my grandmother said quietly. She didn't explain what she saw. She didn't need to. She straightened in her chair and looked back at me once more as if to confirm that I was finished speaking. Then she turned fully toward Lily. Why, she asked, her voice steady, would someone else be living in a house Elena has never even seen? My grandmother didn't raise her voice when she turned to Lily. She didn't need to. The question had already shifted the weight of the room. Chairs remained where they were. No one reached for a glass. The candles burned low, the wax pooling unevenly at the base, as if time had slowed without asking permission. I went to the house yesterday, my grandmother said. She spoke carefully, each word placed as if it might be examined later. I wanted to see it before dinner. The lake was frozen along the edges. There were lights on inside. She paused long enough for the image to settle. I pictured Lake Mendota in late November, the water dark and still, the shoreline brittle with cold. I had never been there, but the way she described it made the place feel oddly familiar, like a location I'd passed in a dream. I rang the bell, she continued. A man answered. Then his wife came to the door. Across the table, Lily's posture stiffened. Her back was straight, too straight, like she was holding herself in place by force. She was my father's younger daughter, born after his second marriage. We had grown up in the same house, but rarely in the same rooms. That had always been explained as coincidence. They were polite, my grandmother said, confident. They invited me inside. My stepmother shifted beside my father, the fabric of her dress brushing softly against the chair. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. The clock in the kitchen clicked forward. I counted 3 seconds between ticks. It helped keep me still. They told me they were retired, my grandmother went on. They said they'd been living there for some time. When I asked under what arrangement, they didn't hesitate. She looked directly at Lily then. Not sharply, not accusingly, just directly. They said the house belongs to Lily. The words landed with a dull finality, like something heavy set down on wood. Lily, I said. It wasn't meant as a challenge. It came out the way a name does when you're checking a fact aloud, hoping it will correct itself mid-air. My voice sounded distant, as if it had traveled farther than the space between my mouth and the table. Lily didn't answer. She stared at the wineglass in front of her. The red liquid trembled slightly, then steadied. Her fingers were wrapped tightly around the stem, the knuckles paling. I noticed a thin scratch near the rim of the glass. It caught the candlelight and flashed once. That's not what they said, my stepmother interjected quickly. You must have misunderstood. Lily would never, I asked them directly, my grandmother said. Her tone remained even. They told me they were Evan's parents. They said their daughter-in-law owned the property. Evan, Lily's husband. The name moved through the room like a current, quiet but unmistakable. My father's jaw tightened. He reached for his napkin and dabbed at his mouth, though he hadn't been eating. I didn't give them your name, my grandmother added. They offered hers. No one contradicted that. Lily swallowed. I saw her throat move. She adjusted her grip on the glass, then tightened it again. The base scraped softly against the table as she shifted it closer to herself, as if anchoring it might anchor her, too. That house, my grandmother said, was purchased under Elena's name. She didn't look at me when she said it. She was still watching Lily, waiting. I've never even seen it, I said quietly. The words felt unnecessary, but once spoken, they stayed. Lily finally looked up. Her eyes flicked to my grandmother, then to my father, then away again. She opened her mouth as if to speak, then closed it. Her hand shook more noticeably now. The wine rippled against the glass. The room held its breath. My grandmother nodded once as if something had just been confirmed. I see, she said. Lily's fingers tightened further around the stem. The glass let out a faint high sound, thin strained like it might crack if held that way much longer. Rebecca spoke before Lily did. She always had that timing, stepping into the narrow space before silence could harden into something permanent. Her chair shifted softly as she leaned forward, one hand already raised in a calming gesture, palm down as if smoothing a wrinkled tablecloth. Mom, you're tired, she said. Her voice carried the practiced warmth she used in public places. You just got back from Europe. Long flights do strange things to memory. Let's talk about this later. She smiled as she said it. Not at my grandmother, but at the table, at the idea of normalcy. Her other hand rested on the edge of her plate, fingers spread, nails pale and precise. The candles reflected faintly off her ring. My grandmother didn't answer right away. She adjusted the cuff of her sleeve instead, slow and deliberate. The fabric made a soft, rasping sound. When she looked up, her eyes were steady. My memory is very clear, she said. The smile on Rebecca's face tightened, then reset. She glanced toward the kitchen as if considering escape. There are dozens of houses around Lake Mendota that look the same, she continued. Similar docks, similar driveways. It's an easy mistake. And honestly, bringing up money like this during Thanksgiving, she let the sentence trail off, the implication hanging where no one could grab it without looking rude. My father nodded faintly beside her. He picked up his fork, turned it over, then set it back down. The metal clicked softly against the plate. No one else followed his lead. This isn't the time, Rebecca said again, more firmly now. We can discuss it tomorrow. Privately. The word privately landed wrong. I felt it register in my body before my mind caught up. I shifted my foot under the table and brushed against the leg of my chair. The floor was cold through the sole of my shoe. I hadn't noticed before. I went to the county office this morning, my grandmother said. Rebecca blinked. Once. Excuse me, I checked the address, she replied. The exterior. The parcel number. I compared it to the contract I signed. She reached into her handbag, which sat upright beside her chair. The clasp made a small metallic snap as she opened it. The sound cut through the room more sharply than any raised voice. She didn't take anything out yet. She didn't need to. Rebecca's hand slid off the table and into her lap. Mom, she said, lowering her voice. You're upsetting everyone. My grandmother looked at her then. Fully. No, she said. I'm listening. A silence followed that felt heavier than the earlier one. Not confused now, expectant. Rebecca exhaled through her nose and straightened. Elena has always had trouble managing stress, she said. You know that. She jumps to conclusions. She forgets details. We've been trying to protect her from things she isn't ready to handle. She spoke smoothly with momentum. Each sentence built on the last. My father stared at his hands. Lily didn't move. Talking about properties and numbers when emotions are high isn't helpful, Rebecca went on. It's Thanksgiving. We're supposed to be grateful. My grandmother's fingers closed around the handle of her cane. I noticed then that her grip had tightened, the skin at her knuckles drawn thin. Gratitude, she repeated, isn't a substitute for truth. Rebecca opened her mouth again, but this time my grandmother didn't let her continue. I know exactly where I was standing, she said. I know who answered the door, and I know what they told me. Her gaze flicked briefly toward my father, then returned to Rebecca. If you're suggesting I imagined that you're mistaken. The room shifted. Not dramatically, just enough. The air felt sharper. The candles burned lower. Somewhere behind us, a cabinet door creaked as the heat adjusted. Rebecca's smile was gone now. She pressed her lips together, then said, This is inappropriate. My grandmother nodded once. Yes, she said. It is. She closed her handbag. And for the first time that evening, no one tried to soften what came next. My grandmother waited until the room settled into that new, sharper quiet before she moved. The candles had burned low enough that the wax had begun to lean one side, softening faster than the other. Outside, wind pushed against the windows in short bursts, the kind that rattled the glass without breaking it. She reached for her handbag again. This time she took something out. It was a photograph printed on thick paper, the edges still clean. She held it between two fingers for a moment as if weighing it, then placed it flat at the center of the table. The sound it made was soft but final. Paper meeting wood. The image faced us all. I didn't lean forward. I didn't need to. The lighting in the dining room was bright enough, and the photograph had been taken on a clear day. The lake behind them was unmistakable, the water stretching wide and calm. The shoreline curved just enough to feel intentional. A large house rose behind the group, pale stone-wide windows, a deck extending toward the water. In the foreground stood Lily. She was smiling, not cautiously, not politely. It was the kind of smile that assumes ownership, that settles comfortably into place. Evan stood beside her, one arm around her waist. His parents flanked them, relaxed, familiar, their hands resting at their sides as if they had every right to be there. I noticed small details before anything else. The angle of the sun, the way Lily's hair was tucked behind her ear, the dock visible just over Evan's shoulder. It all felt composed, planned. My grandmother didn't speak right away. She let the image do its work. My stepmother's chair scraped slightly as she shifted her weight. The sound was quick, involuntary. My father's fingers tapped once against the table, then stopped. Lily stared straight ahead, not at the photo, not at anyone. Her wine glass remained in front of her untouched. "That's Lake Mendota," my grandmother said calmly. "I recognized the bend in the shoreline." She looked at Lily, then not sharply but directly, the way she had earlier. "Would you like to explain this photo?" The question hung in the air. No one answered. I found myself watching Lily's hands. They were resting flat on her thighs now, fingers pressed together as if holding something in place. Her breathing had changed, shorter, shallower. Evan wasn't there, but his presence filled the space beside her all the same. "That's not what it looks like," my stepmother began, then stopped. My grandmother didn't look at her. She didn't look at me either. Her eyes stayed on Lily, patient, unwavering. My father cleared his throat. "Mom?" She raised one finger, just enough to pause him. He fell silent immediately. The photograph sat between us untouched. No one reached for it. No one turned it away. The house in the background seemed larger the longer I looked at it, its windows reflecting the sky in a way that felt almost watchful. I realized then that Lily had posted something like this before. Not this exact image, but something similar. A caption about fresh air, about finally settling down. At the time, I'd scrolled past it without comment, my phone balanced on my knee while I waited for a bus. I remembered the cold that day, the way my hands had shaken not from emotion but from the weather. "Where was this taken?" my grandmother asked. Silence. "Who paid for that dock?" she continued. Silence again. The clock in the kitchen ticked forward. Once. Twice. 3 times. Each second landed with its own weight. Lily didn't move. Her eyes stayed fixed on a spot just beyond the edge of the table. The muscles in her jaw worked once, then stilled. I watched as a faint tremor passed through her fingers and disappeared. My grandmother nodded slowly, as if she had received an answer after all. She folded her hands together on the table, the photograph still between us. "I see," she said. No one spoke. And in that silence, the image remained exactly where she had placed it, impossible to remove without touching it, impossible to explain without admitting something that could not be taken back. The photograph stayed on the table. No one moved it. My grandmother let the silence stretch just long enough for it to stop feeling accidental. Then she spoke again, her voice quieter than before but more precise. "The house is worth $1.2 million, she said. I paid for it in full." I noticed the way my father's shoulders shifted when she said the number. Not a flinch. Something smaller, a recalibration. The dining room light hummed faintly overhead. I could hear the refrigerator cycle on in the kitchen, a low mechanical sound that didn't belong to the moment, but insisted on being heard. I purchased it 3 years ago, she continued. The deed was filed under Elena Moore. She said my name the way it appears on documents. No warmth, no distance, just accuracy. I looked at the photograph again. The house felt unreal now, not because it was expensive, but because it had been spoken into existence without me. I thought of the year she named. 3 years ago, I had been finishing a contract job that paid late and ended early. I remembered the apartment I'd lived in then. 3rd floor. Radiators that banged at night. I remembered counting coins at the laundromat. I've never signed anything I said. My voice didn't rise. It didn't shake. The words felt factual, like confirming the date or the weather. I've never been to Lake Mendota. I've never seen that house. I didn't know it existed. My stepmother inhaled as if to speak, then stopped herself. Her eyes moved to my father. He was still staring at the table at a faint water ring near his plate that hadn't been there earlier. That's not possible, she said finally. Elena forgets things. She misplaces paperwork. You know how she is. My grandmother turned her head slowly. I do know how she is, she said. That's why I was careful. She reached into her handbag again. This time she took out a thin folder and set it beside the photograph. She didn't open it. She didn't need to. The gesture alone was enough to change the air in the room. I had the documents prepared, she said. I had them reviewed. I remember signing them. I remember instructing that the property be held for Elena until she was ready. She paused, then added, I also remember the conversation we had afterward. My father's hand tightened around his napkin. The fabric twisted once, then stilled. My grandmother turned to him fully now. You told me she couldn't handle money, didn't you? The question was calm. It wasn't an accusation. It was a confirmation request, the kind you make when the answer has already been recorded elsewhere. You said she was unstable, she went on. That she panicked easily. That it would be safer if someone else managed things for a while. My father didn't respond. He pressed his lips together and nodded once, barely perceptible. His eyes stayed down. I trusted you, my grandmother said. Not sharply, not sadly, just evenly. I assumed you were protecting her. I watched his face as she spoke. There was no anger there, no defense, just a steady withdrawal, as if he were stepping back from something he could no longer justify standing near. I was told it was temporary, she said. I was told I would be informed of any changes. She closed the folder and placed her hand on top of it. The movement was small, deliberate. I wasn't, she added. The room felt colder then, though the heat hadn't changed. I became aware of the chair beneath me, the pressure along the backs of my thighs. My stepmother stared straight ahead. Lily's hands were clenched tightly in her lap. My grandmother waited. She didn't look at anyone else. She kept her eyes on my father. He didn't meet her gaze. Instead, he lowered his head. And in that simple motion, something unspoken crossed a line it couldn't return from. My father didn't lift his head again right away. The room stayed suspended in that position like a paused frame. My grandmother's hand remained on the folder. The photograph lay beside it undisturbed. Outside, a branch scraped once against the window, then fell still. We didn't take anything from you, my father said at last. His voice was quiet, controlled. He was still looking down. We managed it. Temporarily. Rebecca nodded immediately, as if she had been waiting for that word. Exactly, she said. Managed. You were going through a lot back then. You were overwhelmed. She leaned toward me now, elbows close to her sides, her tone careful. You forget how bad it was, Elena. You couldn't keep track of deadlines. You panicked over small things. We were worried. I watched the condensation slide down my water glass. A thin line formed, broke, and pooled at the base. No one reached for a coaster. You were fragile, Rebecca continued. Emotionally. Financially. It wouldn't have been responsible to put something that big on you. My father finally looked up. His eyes moved between my grandmother and me, then settled on the table again. We did it for your own good, he said. The sentence was delivered evenly like a conclusion. I noticed how easily it fit into the space, how practiced it sounded, as if it had been repeated before, possibly many times. I waited a moment before speaking, long enough to be sure the silence wasn't meant to carry the answer for me. Then why was I left homeless? I asked. The question didn't come out sharp. It wasn't raised. It was placed carefully as if it might be examined later. My voice sounded unfamiliar to me. Steadier than I expected. Rebecca's eyes flickered. She recovered quickly. That wasn't our intention, she said. Things don't always work out the way you plan. You told me to be independent, I said. You said it was important I learn how to stand on my own. That's not the same thing, my father replied. He straightened slightly in his chair. We assumed you'd figure it out. Figure it out. The phrase landed and stayed. I nodded once slowly. I asked for help, I said. More than once. Rebecca waved a hand lightly. You always make things sound worse than they are. My grandmother shifted in her chair. The wood creaked under her weight. You didn't mention any of this to me, she said to my father. He hesitated. We didn't want to worry you. She tilted her head. You didn't want me to interfere. Rebecca's mouth tightened. Mom, please. This isn't fair. My grandmother didn't respond to that. She looked at me instead. Did you know any of this? She asked. No, I said. It was the simplest answer I'd given all night. Rebecca exhaled sharply, then smiled. Not warmly, not kindly. It was a small, contained smile, the kind that closes rather than opens. You see, she said, glancing toward Lily, this is exactly what I mean. She can't handle pressure. She jumps straight to accusations. I didn't respond. I noticed instead how Lily had gone very still again. Her shoulders were relaxed now. Her hands rested loosely in her lap. My father rubbed his temples. We were trying to protect the family, he said, to keep things stable. Stable for whom my grandmother asked. No one answered. Rebecca leaned back in her chair. The smile stayed on her face, unchanged. It wasn't defensive, it wasn't nervous, it was settled, as if the explanation had always been sufficient in her mind, as if nothing that had been said tonight would require revision. Lily laughed first. It was short and sharp, the kind that slips out before it's shaped into something polite. The sound cut through the room and then stopped just as abruptly. Everyone turned toward her. Even Rebecca looked surprised. This is getting ridiculous, Lily said. She leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. The movement was loose, almost casual, as if she had finally decided there was no reason to pretend anymore. You're acting like this is some kind of crime. My grandmother didn't respond. She waited. Lily glanced at me then. Not quickly. She took her time. Her eyes moved over my coat, hanging on the back of the chair, the scuffed toes of my shoes, the way my hands were folded together in my lap. I followed her gaze without looking down myself. I already knew what she was seeing. Let's be honest, she said. Someone like you would have ruined that place. The words landed cleanly. No hesitation. No apology. She reached for her glass at last and took a sip, her hand steady now. Whatever tension had been in her earlier had settled into something firmer. You can barely keep your own life together, she continued. What would you have done with a house like that? Left it empty, let it fall apart? Miss Payments. Rebecca didn't interrupt. She didn't need to. Lily had taken over. I actually use it, Lily said. We maintain it. Evan's parents live there now. They take care of it. It makes sense. My father shifted in his chair but didn't speak. His silence felt deliberate. I mean, Lily added, tilting her head slightly, it's better than letting it sit there while you bounce between couches. I felt my hands tighten just briefly. I noticed it and loosened them again. The room felt warmer than before, or maybe I was just more aware of the air. You never even asked, I said. Lily shrugged. You wouldn't have said yes. That's not the point, I replied. She smiled faintly. It is to me. My grandmother stood then. The movement was slow, careful. She placed both hands on the table, first steadying herself before pushing back her chair. The legs scraped against the floor, a low sound that carried more weight than Lily's laughter had. The cane tipped slightly as she reached for it, then found its balance. Enough, she said. The word wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Lily stopped mid-breath. Rebecca straightened. My father finally looked up. My grandmother didn't look at Lily when she spoke again. She didn't look at Rebecca or my father either. She turned toward me. For a moment she just stood there, her hand resting on the top of the cane, the other at her side. The light from the chandelier caught in the silver of her hair. I noticed then how small she looked compared to the room and how solid. She took one step forward, then another. Each step was measured. The cane tapped softly against the floor once, then again. The sound marked the space between us closing. Behind her, Lily said nothing. Rebecca's mouth opened slightly, then closed. No one tried to stop her. When my grandmother reached my side, she placed her hand on my shoulder. It was warm, steady. The contact was brief, but it grounded the room in a way nothing else had. She didn't speak right away. She let the silence settle again, heavier now shaped by what had already been said and could not be unsaid. And in that moment, I understood that whatever explanation had been offered, whatever justifications had been layered on top, they were finished. Something had shifted from conversation to consequence. My grandmother's hand remained on my shoulder when the front door opened. The sound carried through the house wood against frame, the rush of cold air, the faint jingle of keys. Footsteps followed, measured, unhurried. The kind that didn't belong to someone arriving for dinner late. Daniel Brooks stepped into the dining room without looking around. He removed his coat carefully and folded it over one arm. His suit was dark, unremarkable. He carried a slim briefcase worn at the edges. He nodded once to my grandmother, then to no one else. "Mrs. Moore," he said, "you asked me to come immediately." "Yes," she replied. "Thank you." No one spoke as he set the briefcase on the table. The photograph and folder were pushed aside slightly to make room. The leather latch clicked open. Inside were documents stacked neatly, each marked with colored tabs. He laid them out one by one, aligning the edges with deliberate care. "This isn't necessary," Rebecca said. Her voice was too quick. "We can handle this privately." Daniel Brooks didn't look at her. He addressed my grandmother. "Would you like me to begin?" She nodded. He picked up the first document. "This is the deed transfer for the Lake Mendota property," he said, "originally purchased under Elena Moore's name as indicated here." He slid the paper toward the center of the table. I didn't touch it. I didn't need to. The header was clear enough. "The current registered owner," he continued, "is Lily Carter." Lily sat forward abruptly. That's because Daniel raised one finger not toward her, but toward the document. "The transfer date is October 15th, 3 years ago. The sale price was $1. My father's chair scraped back slightly. He stood halfway, then sat again. His breathing had changed. Shorter now. More visible. "That was a gift," Rebecca said. "It was family." Daniel turned the page. "This is the transfer agreement submitted to the registry. Miss Carter claimed it bore Elena Moore's signature." He paused. "Just long enough. This document," he said, "was printed 6 months ago." Lily's head snapped up. "That's not—" "We conducted a digital analysis," Daniel continued calmly. "The printer identification code embedded in the paper confirms the print date. 6 months ago. Not 3 years. The words settled slowly, like dust. My father stood this time, fully, his hands braced against the back of his chair. "That's impossible," he said. "There must be a mistake." Daniel met his eyes. "There isn't." He moved to the next set of papers. "These are bank statements from an account associated with Elena Moore's student loan repayments. Funds were deposited regularly. However, the payments were redirected." He slid the page forward. "To an account under Rebecca Moore's name." Rebecca's hand flew to her mouth. Not in surprise, in calculation. "And these," Daniel said, lifting a thin stack of printed emails, "were sent anonymously to multiple employers during Elena Moore's job search. They allege severe mental instability and unprofessional conduct." He placed them down carefully. "The IP addresses trace back to this house." The room felt smaller now. Or perhaps quieter. The refrigerator hum stopped. The heat kicked off. I could hear my father's breath. "You can't prove that," he said. Daniel nodded. "We can." Lily stood abruptly, knocking her chair back. "This is insane," she said. "Dad told me it was fine." "He said as long as the paperwork was in place, Lily," my father snapped. "Too late." She covered her mouth. Her eyes filled quickly. The tears came fast, uneven. "I didn't know it was fraud," she said. "You said she'd never notice." My father turned toward her, his face pale. "Stop talking." Daniel closed the folder. At this point, he said that would be advisable. Lily sank back into her chair, her shoulders shaking. Rebecca stared straight ahead, unmoving. My father looked from one to the other, his hands trembling at his sides. The photograph was still on the table. Nothing had moved it, and nothing could undo what had just been placed beside it. No one spoke after that. The documents remained where Daniel Brooks had placed them, squared to the edge of the table. My grandmother withdrew her hand from my shoulder and rested it on her cane again, as if the room required balance now. The clock ticked. The heat clicked back on. Outside, the wind pressed once more against the windows. "Call them," my grandmother said. She didn't specify who. Daniel nodded and stepped into the hallway, his voice low as he made the call. I stayed where I was. My father sank into his chair, hands open on his knees. Rebecca stared at a point above the doorway. Lily's breathing came in uneven bursts, her shoulders still moving. The officers arrived quietly. No sirens. Just the sound of boots on the porch, the door opening, the faint scrape of a badge against a coat. They listened. They asked a few questions. Daniel answered most of them. My grandmother corrected one detail. My father tried to speak once and was stopped with a raised hand. Lily cried again, this time without words. The house absorbed it all without comment. When the officers left the dining room to make their calls, my grandmother asked Daniel for one more thing. He returned to the table and opened a second folder. The paper was heavier, the ink darker. "This is the revised will," he said. He placed it in front of her. She read it without hurry, turned one page, then another. She signed with a steady hand, the pen leaving a clean line. Daniel countersigned. The sound of paper sliding back into the folder was soft, definitive. My father stood then. "Mom," he said. "Please." She looked up at him. "If you have something to say," she replied, "say it to Elena." They all turned to me. The movement was almost synchronized. For a moment, no one spoke. The chandelier hummed faintly above us. "I'm not asking for mercy," I said. "I'm asking for restitution." The words didn't echo. They didn't need to. I had practiced nothing. I had rehearsed nothing. The sentence felt finished as soon as it left my mouth. Rebecca shook her head. "You can't do this." I didn't answer her. I looked at my father. He opened his mouth and closed it again. Lily wiped her face with the back of her hand, leaving a smear beneath her eye. No one argued after that. The officers returned. One of them nodded toward Daniel, another toward my grandmother. Then they turned to Lily. She stood slowly as if the floor had changed. My father reached for her and stopped. Rebecca said her name once softly. Lily didn't look back. When the door closed behind them, the house felt larger, emptier. The table was still set. The turkey had cooled. The candles burned down to small, steady flames. My grandmother leaned on her cane and turned toward me. "This is where your real life begins," she said. Later, I stepped onto the porch alone. Snow had started to fall thin at first, then steadier. It gathered on the railing on the steps on the dark yard beyond. I breathed in and watched the vapor leave my mouth. Behind me, the house was quiet. Not peaceful, just quiet. I stood there until the cold reached my fingers. Then I went back inside, closed the door, and let the silence remain where it belonged. No one argued after Daniel finished laying out the charges. The documents stayed on the table, squared and exposed as if they belonged there now. My grandmother rested both hands on her cane. The wood floor creaked softly beneath her weight. Outside, snow had begun to fall, thin flakes ticking against the windows like a clock that had changed its mind. "Call them," she said. Daniel stepped into the hallway. His voice stayed low. The house did not echo. When he returned, the room felt altered, not louder or quieter, just rearranged. My father sat rigidly, his palms flat on his knees. Rebecca stared at the doorway, her expression held in place by effort. Lily's breathing was uneven. She kept wiping her hands on her skirt as if something invisible clung to them. The officers arrived without urgency. No sirens, no spectacle. They listened while Daniel spoke. They asked Lily to stand. She hesitated, then rose too quickly and knocked her chair back. The sound was sharp, final. She began talking all at once. That she hadn't meant to hurt anyone. That she'd only followed instructions. That she thought the paperwork made it legitimate. The words tangled. One officer raised a hand. Another asked her to slow down. They led her toward the door. She turned once, eyes searching the room for something to hold. No one moved. When the door closed behind her, the house absorbed the silence like it had been waiting for it. My father stood halfway, then sank back down. His face had gone gray. He asked Daniel what would happen next. Daniel answered without drama. Conspiracy, misuse of identity, financial fraud, accounts frozen pending investigation. My father nodded as if taking notes for a meeting he would no longer attend. Rebecca said nothing. She watched the officers leave, then looked down at her hands. Her ring caught the light. She turned it once and stopped. Daniel opened a second folder and slid it toward my grandmother. The paper was heavier, the ink darker. She read each page carefully, turning them one by one. When she signed, her hand did not shake. Daniel countersigned. The folder closed with a soft sound that carried farther than it should have. My father spoke then. "Mom." She didn't answer him. She looked at me instead. "If there's anything you want to say," she said, "say it now." I stood. The chair scraped lightly. I didn't raise my voice. "I'm not asking for mercy," I said. "I'm asking for restitution." Daniel named the amounts: property value, unlawful transfers, lost income, damaged credit. The total sat on the table like another object, solid and unavoidable. Rebecca shook her head. She said it was excessive. She said it would ruin them. No one responded. The words had already done their work. The officers returned. They explained the next steps: statements, court dates, restrictions. Lily would not be released that night. My father asked if he could speak to her. The answer was no. Rebecca said her name once softly, as if testing whether it still belonged to her. It did not bring Lily back. When the door closed again, the house felt larger. The table was still set. The turkey had cooled. Wax pooled at the base of the candles. My grandmother leaned on her cane and turned toward me. "This is where your real life begins," she said. Later, I stepped onto the porch alone. Snow had gathered on the railing and the steps. The yard beyond was dark and quiet, the kind of quiet that doesn't ask anything of you. I breathed in and watched the air leave my mouth. Behind me, the house was still, not peaceful, finished. I stood there until the cold reached my fingers. Then I went back inside, closed the door, and let the silence remain where it belonged.